Welcome. This is the first video on Algebra 1 and a long series of videos I'll be doing on this subject. So the first video I'm going to be doing today is on one-step equations. And to know and how to solve a one-step equation, the first thing we need to do is to understand what an equation is exactly. So an equation is basically very simple. An equation says that two things are equal to each other. So let's give an example. Let's say I was at the mall, right? And I was with a friend and I was buying a shirt that cost $5. So dollar is five, right? Then what happens after that? So then I realize that I have to pay a $2 sales tax in addition to the $5. So I'm going to add my $2 over here, right? And we know that combined 5 plus 7 would equal $7. 5 plus 2 is equal to $7. So $7 is what 5 plus 2 is equal to. And there we go. We just solved an entire equation right there. So equations are very simple. It's saying that there's basically two things equal to each other. So this part, this side of the equation is equal to this side of the equation. So in this video now, we're going to be looking at equations, but we're going to be doing it in a bit more of a complex way. So the next thing we're going to do now is to look at how we can use equations with variables. So variables you've probably seen in classes like pre-algebra, and that is usually things like x or y, but basically any kind of letter or symbol that shows us as it's showing us a placeholder, I guess, of where certain things belong. So we know now that we have equations, and that's basically when two sides are equal to each other. So the next thing we're going to do now is we're going to essentially look at the parts of an equation. So let's break down this very simply, and let's go very slowly on this. So let's just look at something as simple as an equation like 2x plus 3 is equal to 5. So if you are confused, relax, don't worry. I'm going to break this down for you. So if you're given this equation and I want to break down the individual parts of the equation, we need to know the different ways to call out the different parts of the equation. So the first thing we look at when we do one of these is what we call this thing in the front of the variable. So this is our variable, right? So we're going to label that as our variable. But the thing in front of the variable, what do we call that? So that's what we call a coefficient. And a coefficient is very simple. It's just some number we're putting in front of a variable. So that means that we're multiplying something times the variable in order to get a value. So we're multiplying 2 times our variable in this case, and the 2 is the coefficient. So that is all you need to know about that. The next part is this thing right here. This thing right here is called a constant. So we're going to call it a constant. And all that is, it is basically just a part of the equation that does not have a variable in it. That's the best way to think of it. So this is a constant, and technically this is also a constant, right? But they're basically two things that are, these two things do not have anything attached to it. So there's no variable attached to it. And that's all you need to know. And finally, your teacher may call this middle part right here the addition sign or the subtraction sign or anything that's an operation. They would call that an operator. So these are just some parts that you may see if your teacher used that on a test. That's what those words mean. So you may just want to know what those mean just in case. But now I'm going to get to the meat of the matter. So let's look at now how we combine like terms. So in math, we basically have this thing called like terms. And in algebra, our goal is to always try to find ways to combine the like terms. So I'm going to give you an example of this. So let's say I have 5 plus 7 plus x. Okay, so the first thing we have to look at when we see something like this is, are there any like terms in this? And yes, there are like terms. There's the number 5 and the number 7, because these are both what we just called constants. So in this case, we have 5 and 7 are both constants. So now that we have these constants, we can combine them because we can add those together. So we add constants together. So 5 plus 7 is 12. And then we just bring down the x. So we put the plus x. And that is all we do. That's how we combine the like terms. It's very simple. Let's move on to another one. Let's say we had 3x plus 4x. So all we're doing here is the same exact concept, except now we have an x, right? So we are adding now, what are we doing? We're adding our coefficients. We have this coefficient and this coefficient. So what we're going to do now is we're going to add 3 plus 4, because those are coefficients in front of the same thing, which is an x. So 3 plus 4 is 7. And then since they're both attached to an x in that way, we're going to bring down the x like that. So those are some things you may see. And the good thing is you just want to be able to spot these things. And the same thing could apply for subtraction, for instance. I could have had 3x minus 4x, right? And 3x minus 4x would have been negative 1x. And just for good measure, if you ever have a negative 1x or something like that, you could just make it equal to negative x, because those are basically the same thing. It's then as you grow older, you'll just continue to use negative x. So now the next part of this is going to be showing you how to solve one of these one-step equations. So I'm going to go very slowly on this too. I want to make sure that you understand how to do these one-step equations. So you'll probably hear this rule in your math class, and it's just this rule that you're going to, whatever you do on one side of an equation, you're going to do onto the other side of the equation. So we're going to do that same concept right here. So let's look at this. In this equation, we have x minus 7 is equal to 13. So let's break it down very simply. So what can I do? What do we see any like terms? Let's see. So we only have one of these variables, but look, we have one constant and two constants. So since we have two constants, that's a good sign because we can combine the like terms. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to try to move over the thing on this side to this side. So we have a constant on this side. I want to move it over to this side. So let's just do this very simply. So I take my negative 7 right here. What I want to do to that is I want to bring it over, but to bring it over, I have to do the exact opposite of what is happening in this equation over here. So right now it's x minus 7. So I want to do the exact opposite. So I want to do x plus 7, right? Because if you think about it, x minus 7 and x plus 7, that equals 0, right? So when we have 0, that means that negative 7 and positive 7 would cancel out. So then we would just be left with x minus 0 on this side. And that's what we want, because x minus 0 is the same thing to x, right? And our goal whenever we solve any equation is to isolate one side or one variable on one side. So we just did that. So we just added the plus 7 over here. But the thing we have to remember is that when we add something to one side, we have to do the same exact thing to the other side. So we take our plus 7 over there, and we also add plus 7 over here. So 13 plus 7 is 20. Therefore, x would be equal to 20. And that is all we're going to do. It's very simple, very straightforward. Let's look at another example. So we have we have 14b is equal to negative 56. So in this case, we just have something being multiplied by a variable, and it's equal to a constant. So all we're going to do in this case is we want to get rid of the thing in front of the variable because we're almost fully isolated. So to get rid of this thing in front of the variable that's annoying me, I'm going to divide 14 on both sides. So I divide the 14 on this side and I divide the 14 on this side. So now b is going to be equal to negative 56 divided by 14. And negative 56 divided by 14 is negative 4. So that's just what you're going to do. Very straightforward, very easy. And just break it down very slowly if you're having trouble with it. Let's do another example. So now we have negative 6 is equal to b over 18. So what we do in this case when we have a fraction is we're just going to try to find a way to get the fraction done so that we can simplify it to such an extent that we can figure out the answer. So we have b over 18 is equal to negative 6. So what I'm going to do to get the b by itself on this side is to multiply the 18 on both sides. So I multiply my 18 over here, and I multiply my 18 over here. And what you will notice is that when I multiply the 18 over here, the reason I was doing that is because when you have something in the bottom of a denominator, I can actually use that to my benefit, because whenever we have something in the bottom of the denominator, you multiply like this. So you want to try to do that as much as you can. So anything in the bottom, you automatically multiply it And when you do that to one side, you do it to the other side as well. So you do that, and you also do this. So now that we have that, we are simply going to solve this out, right? So we have canceled out everything on the right side so that just b is there. So now b is going to be equal to 18 times negative 6. And when 18 times negative 6 is there, we can solve that. We could use our calculator. I'm going to do it on my computer real quick. 18 times negative 6 is negative 108. And that would be our answer. So the point I want you guys to take away is that your goal is to isolate for one variable. That is all you're trying to do. And once you do that, you are done. So once you've gotten to one variable, as we will see in all of these examples, we have b over here, x over here. Once the variable is isolated, you're done. And that's all you need to do. Now I'm going to give you guys a few examples. Pause the video, and when you come back, you will see, you can watch how I'm doing each of these. Okay, so for this one, I'm assuming you've paused the video and done all the problems on your own. Let's try this out now. So for number 15, v over 8 is equal to 2. So what we do for that is we just have to multiply the 8, just like I did in this problem up here. So we multiply the 8 on both sides and multiply the 8 over here. So when I do that, the 8 cancels out, and we're left with v is equal to 2 times 8, which is 16. Good. Let's continue. So for number 16, same exact concept right here, right? We just take our 11 and in the bottom of a fraction, so we're going to multiply it times 11, cancel this out, same exact idea over here, multiplying times 11, and then k is equal to whatever 11 times 16 is. So 16 times 11 is 176. So that would be the answer. Let's continue. This one, number 17, is actually very, very simple. Anything equal to 0 in a one-step equation like in this, where there's only one variable, is going to be 0. And the reasoning is this, right? Because if I have my x on this side and I have a 0 over here, I want to isolate like this, what's going to happen? I have to divide by negative 15 to cancel out and get x by itself. So I can do that on both sides, and then x would be equal to 0. So just look out for some stuff like that because it's pretty easy. For number 18, pretty similar to number 17, we're dividing by negative 17 now on both sides to get x by itself. Oh, wait, shoot. Hang on. There we go. Okay, so we do negative 17 on both sides, and x would be equal to whatever 204 divided by 17 is. So that'd be 12. And one thing to note is when you're dividing a negative by a negative, the answer is always positive. So what I like to usually do when I see a negative and a negative, I just draw two plus signs like that, because negatives divided by negatives are always positive. That is just the rule. Okay, we have two more problems. Let's look at number 19. So we have 21 is equal to negative 7n. Pretty simple stuff. We're just going to divide negative 7 on both sides to get n by itself. N is therefore going to be equal to 21 divided by negative 7. So that's going to equal negative 3. And finally, we have m over 4 is equal to negative 13. So all we're going to do here is similar to above. We're going to multiply a 4 on both sides. And m would be equal to whatever negative 13 times 4 is. And that would be equal to negative 52. So negative 52. All right, well, I hope this video was helpful. If you have any questions about any of the content in this video, please feel free to leave a comment in the video below. Thank you so much for watching, and please tune in next time for another video on Algebra 1.